of the all-time greats as an Ulster player. You've had a really good career as a media pundit as well, highly respected. Now you're Ulster General Manager. The first question is, why?
I thought you were going to say highly respected, but look, I think the opportunity came up when Bryn resigned. You know, that was the big catalyst. And I was working for an insurance company. I'd spent the last 4 years back and forward to London, and for me it was about when I retired, I wanted to go and do something different. I wanted to challenge myself in a different industry and learn more about business, and I got probably what felt at times like a master's in business I was doing. I was being surrounded by, the group. So the group is huge, 12,000 employees worldwide, and I was going to meetings with the group chief executive, the chief investment officer, the chief commercial officer. So the stuff you're learning around that was unbelievable. But then when the opportunity came to not to travel and to use a bit of those skills that I've learnt over that 4 years and put them into something that means a lot to me, it just felt like the right move for me in terms of my personal development. A challenge for myself, but probably as importantly for my family.
Does it feel like you've came home?
It's very different, I can tell you. It's this, I suppose, the assumption that I know where I'm going. It's a very, very different feeling driving around the back of this stand and going into the change rooms and out onto the pitch versus driving up the back of that stand and straight up into the office. And it feels a little bit more lonely, and a little bit, well, in some regards more pressure, in some regards less pressure, but do I feel like I'm home? This place is very special to me, so from that point of view, I'm delighted to be here to try to, through, you mentioned bits and pieces of punditry, you always, as a pundit, you have to make comments about, what they're doing, what they could do to improve. Well, when this opportunity came, it was actually the group chief investment officer of the insurance company he said, well, now's your chance to actually do something about it, or else if you don't take it, then you can't criticise anymore, because you've been given the opportunity to fix things that you see as being issues, and to look and try to help and support the stuff that they're doing really, really well. So, home, interesting.
What will your job entail, Rory? I think people are really interested in that.
It's a reasonably broad job description, but it is largely the professional game, and that's including obviously the men's game. So there's recruitment, there's retention of players, coaches. There's also then the pathway and everything involved in that. There's the women's game, which is fast coming down the track with the professionalism and how we as a province support the women, and how we, I suppose a bit like the men, is how we support them to get more representation into that Irish team, how we give them the platform to achieve everything that they're capable of achieving. And there's probably a bit of a change, there's a bit of a commercial aspect to it as well. Not so much the great work that's being done in the admin building around the signage here and the stadium naming rights, but actually more about how do we keep that sort of the support from the wider commercial community, the supporters, all of that side of things. So look, it's quite broad. At the minute I'm trying to get my head around what it all looks like, but at the minute it feels very much like recruitment and retention. But there's going to be a bigger bit that involves strategically and probably culturally is how we move this organisation forward, how we use the foundations that are in place, and on various times over the last 20 years have been in place, so how we make sure that becomes the foundation to keep growing and keep improving.
You mentioned recruitment there, so I'll go there. You played in an era where there were some massive names brought in from abroad. Maybe not so much now, but are the finances there, Rory, to bring in like a game changer such as Ruan Pienaar, for example?
Yeah, look, I think that's probably, it's part of the job of the organisation to make sure we try to get those finances. It's probably part of that commercial remit that I have to make sure that we're doing everything we can to increase the finances. The reality is that player wages are going up, and since the days of Ruan Pienaar, our budget has been going down. So they're not exactly the key ingredients to sign these world-class players, but we've got to be you've got to do the best job that we can. And in terms of recruitment, it's actually now about making sure that anyone we sign is adding value. Like, obviously you want a combination of both, but they've got to add value in the pitch, but also they've got to be bringing through our young players. They've got to be aiding the development, and they've got to ultimately be helping to move this organisation to where we want to be.
Short-term and long-term goals, what do you have in mind with those with this job?
I think sort of short-term is just to keep building on the start of the season. You know, it's about performance. I am not going to stand here, because it's frustrated me now for going on. It'll be 20 years at the end of the season. You know, we're talking about trophies and bits and pieces. It's not. It's about performance. It's about giving the people that sit in these very seats, and the people that are, whether it's family, friends, commercial partners, you guys in the press, it's about giving them something to be proud of on this pitch. And it's about growing that community, growing culturally, so that people that we perform here, but the people that see that performance is aligned to what is special and unique about not just this organisation, but the province. And look, that's the short-term goal, is to deliver that. But the long-term goal is to deliver it consistently over a number of years. Ultimately, I came through a system that I'm very proud to have come through a system. So we need to make sure that from a player and a coach point of view, that we're supporting the sort of players and coaches, that anyone that doesn't quite make it, we've got to make sure. I think the first question we've got to ask ourselves is, did we do everything we could as an organisation? And if the answer is no, then we go, right, well, how do we improve that? Knowing that you can't get everything right, but you've got to learn. And we talked, like you'll have heard me saying what felt like an eternity ago as a player, you know, you've got to learn, we've got to learn. But the reality is, in the backroom staff, that we actually do have the ability to properly learn and keep moving forward, knowing that in any organisation you're going to make mistakes. I've been involved in a big business that makes mistakes, but it's how you learn and how you grow and how you move forward from that. And that is long term where we've got to try to get to, that consistency.
There's been a few coaches since you retired here. Rory, is Richie Murphy the right man to take Ulster forward the way you want and the way the fans want?
I think that what we've got to make sure we do is that we don't pin all our hopes on one person. You know, we've done that in the past. If I look right through my career, sort of my retirement career, you know, it's always been, we're just waiting for the head coach to come, right, you need to fix this, you need to do this, you need to do that. Look, Richie's done, at the end of last season aside, since he's come in, he's given us stability. He's brought in his own coaching staff now. We've had an encouraging start to the season, but Richie is part, and the head coach is a very important part of it, but he's part of a wider network that we have within this organisation. And that is part of my job, is to make sure that we support Richie and his team to achieve the very, very best he can. And you know, I keep talking about ceilings. You know, we got to make sure that these guys are every day trying to reach their ceiling, and that we're doing everything we can to support them.
It's been really good that we have made an encouraging start Ulster this season. I was wondering, what has it been like for you watching from afar the struggles that the team have had? Has it been tough, Rory?
Of course, it's always tough, you know, and it's somewhere that you give so much of your life, really, in another, as a player. You want to see them doing well, of course you do. I think the reality is you have to keep reminding yourself that, because it's when you retire, you all of a sudden, you forget about all the bad stuff and you remember the good stuff. And it's very easy for former players to judge, whenever the reality is that Ulster have been doing this for a number of years, you know, up, down, great performances, bad performances. So you've got to look at it in that light as well. And I would always looked at it, you know, there was a lot of people that I was close to playing in this organisation, and you know what they're going through when they lose, but you also know the flip side when they win, what they're going through. So look, it's you want this place to be successful, and whether you're a player, a fan, or now within the management.
How did you feel in the last few years when there were no Ulster players in Ireland matchday squads?
Hugely frustrated for them, because I was privileged enough to have represented Ireland quite a few times, so I know what it's like to pull on that green jersey and go out in front of the Aviva at a packed house, and you want the guys that you watch here that you think are good enough to get that opportunity. The reality is that there was obviously aspects of their game that wasn't quite good enough, and that's the bit that we've got to do here to make sure. If you take it from the game last Saturday, no Ulster representation at 23. Well, we've now got to look at that as a real life example to go, okay, well, of those 4 guys that were involved, how do we make sure that we make them better versions, as Andy Farrell would say, better versions of themselves? So come the start of February, that at least one of them are involved in that 23. Obviously, we're greedy and we want all 4 to be involved. We want all 4 to be starting. But look, the reality will be whatever Andy picks. But we've got to look and go, how do we make sure we keep progressing that talent that we have to make them international standard? Or to whatever is the issue that they're not getting picked, whatever they need to work on, that we make sure we're helping them work on that.
Is there talent coming through the Ulster Academy? I know there's been a lot of talk about the Ulster Academy now for maybe a decade and more. What talent do you see coming through there?
Look, I've been lucky enough to have been sort of helping out, coaching some of the school down in Armagh, just because my eldest son and my daughter, and well, hopefully the youngest will be there. So look, I see the level of players within that sort of school system. I'm a very I understand the club game very well. Like, I came through sort of after I left school through a club system. My dad played for a club, so it's very important to know that there are lots of very, very good players in there. Whenever I look at, everyone loves to point at the academy and go, we don't have enough players. But actually, when you look at our squad and you look at the whatever 23 we put out for Friday night, when you look at that, there are a lot of good players that were born in this province. So there's obviously been something right done along the way, but it goes back to the same thing I keep saying. We've got to look and go, right, it's good, but can we ask some questions to go, well, can we do it better? If the answer is no, then great. We'll keep working hard on that, but we'll keep asking that same question. How do we do it better? How do we pick these kids up, and when they're leaving school, how do we make them a bit more robust so we get less injuries in the academy? Or how do we make them a little bit better at 18 so when they go into the academy they're 6 months ahead of where they are? And that's all about how we develop them as young men, but also how we develop our coaches, how do we develop our systems within that.
I wanted to ask you about Ireland. There's been a lot of talk about the age profile of Andy Farrell's side, and it's true, a lot of them are over 30s. What have you made of all that?
Look, ultimately, I was 37 when I played, so look, I think if you're, that old saying, if you're good enough, you're young enough. It's also, if you're good enough, it doesn't matter what age you are. And I think the one thing he'd say about Andy when he came in, he set his stall out very early that he wasn't just going to make radical changes. He wasn't going to go, if you take this autumn, and go play New Zealand, Chicago on a Saturday and then make 23 changes 7 days later to play Japan. That he'll make some strategic changes along the way, because he thinks that partnerships, or I believe he thinks that partnerships and keeping that fluidity in the pitch allows those players that come in the best chance to show what they can do. And look, he'll be under no illusions that he'll want more depth. But then again, you'll throw that back to certainly over the last number of years, the other 3 provinces, us included. Like, we've got to step up and we've got to be doing better with our talent to give him more headaches. So, look, he'll have a lot of, I'm sure he'll have a lot of thoughts going through his head between now and February. And to be honest, all we can really do is to make sure that we give him even more food for thought by the performances out here.
Where do you think rugby's at as a whole, Rory? Like, after the weekend match, there was so much talk about the cards, the refereeing, the duration of the game. Lots of criticism was flying about. You've been in rugby your whole life. You've seen it go through different phases. Where do you think rugby's at in 2025?
Look, it's at a stage now where, there's been a big spotlight shone on rightly so, on the head injuries. And it's almost, if you take it, rewind it a little bit, where you're kind of asking players to go, right, well, now if there's head contact, you're going to be sanctioned. But they were so ingrained in having to tackle a bit higher that But now there's been such an iteration of that now that players have just got to get it. They know that if there's head contact, you're going to be in trouble. So we've really got to balance. And look, I hope that evolution comes around where, and rugby's always evolving, where actually smart rugby players are valued as highly as unbelievable athletes. Obviously, your ultimate one is an athlete that's a smart rugby player, but we've got to now, with discipline being a key issue, and like ultimately discipline was what cost Ireland on Saturday, or certainly cost Ireland a proper shot at having to win that game, and that you got to ask yourself, do smart rugby players make some of those decisions? Some do in the heat of the moment. And that's what we got to keep evolving. The big thing is, and I've seen it with law changes over, when you knee jerk and you try to change loads of stuff, it just turns into even more farce. What we got to do is, as they always do, World Rugby is evolving. Even if you look at the makeup of the boards now, the Players Union being on the boards, you have guys that have been professional rugby players that understand that the amateur game and the evolution of the professional game are different, and that the needs of the game now are different to what they were 5, 10, 20 years ago. So look, they've got to keep evolving. But look, World Rugby, in fairness to them, you're going to get moments like Saturday where all talk is about the referee. When actually, if you're looking at it from a South African point of view, if I was a South African front row, I'd be saying, why are you not talking about us in the scrum and how good they were? And that's what we got to get to. But look, to think that World Rugby aren't asking themselves those questions as well, I think is a bit naive, and that's what they'll be doing in various, I'm sure there's been numerous Zoom calls since that game, and it's probably reflecting on the autumn, because they like to look at periods and they reflect back and go, right, well, how can we be different than that? The referees will do the same.
I don't know about you, but I think rugby has changed dramatically. Even from 10 years ago, it's changed in terms of the physical nature of the game. I'm just wondering if you think that in Ulster, rugby is still like a sport of choice for lots of kids, boys and girls out there. You're a dad, I'm a dad. We both know that there's so much other things that kids can be doing, sport and otherwise. But do you think parents now look at rugby and think that's a sport that I want to see my kid involved in?
I think what we've got to do is really highlight the brilliant parts of it. There's so many good bits of it. You have your teamwork, you have that reliance on each other. There's, from a parental point of view, rugby's one of the few sports that, no matter whether you're fast, slow, short, tall, there's a position for you on the pitch. So we've got to really embrace that and really celebrate that, because the values that rugby holds are very important, and we've got to make sure that when they slip, and I talk about learning, we've got to make sure that when they slip, we don't allow that to happen, and that we come down on that hard, because that is ultimately, people want to play rugby because of those aspects of it, those values. So we've got to protect those, knowing that things happen. But in terms of choices, the difference is now, and I think back to when I was a kid, we played rugby on a Saturday morning, we maybe went to Cubs on a Tuesday night, and that was about it. Whereas I see now, as a parent, between my wife and I put myself into this even though I really shouldn't, you effectively become a taxi service, because you want to offer your child every opportunity to try everything, and then what do they love, and whether that's sport, whether it's the arts, whatever it is, or youth clubs, all of these things. So with that becomes draws to other things. So we've got to make sure that out here we put on a good performance, we entertain people, we make people want to come back, but we've also got to connect and engage with the community. The brilliant thing about provincial rugby in Ireland is that the young boy or girl in the street can see their hero and walk past them and say hello to them, and they engage with them and they sign a jersey, and the big thing is, you don't know the impact that's going to have, because all of us have met their hero at a point in time, and that's that fork in the road. Do you go, oh, he was unbelievable, I want to go and do what he did? Or do you go, I'm not really sure about that, I'll go and try something else, especially with everything on offer? So that is our responsibility within these four walls. Who
was your hero?
David Humphreys, when I was very, very young.
And now he's giving you this job.
No, yeah, because Hum's so much older than me.
Yeah, he certainly is. Going back to Ulster, last couple of questions. What is your message to the Ulster fans, Rory?
Look, I think that it's a little bit around patience and understand that we're building. I also get the frustration that they've probably been told that for, I don't know, well, potentially 20 years coming up at the end of the season, that the standards that we hold ourselves to in terms of performance, we're going to keep building on those and moving forward. And look, it's ultimately that we're all in this together. We'll be saying the same thing to the clubs and the schools, is that for us to have a chance, I sort of mentioned a little bit about the budgets, for us to have a chance of being competitive and to produce performances out there that everyone can be proud of, we need everyone a part of this. So whether you're a part of the community, you're a fan, you're a club, you're a school, certainly in the short term, we need to come together, sort of try to fill this place, try to engage in all the sort of pathway stuff, because if we can be successful here, then the pie gets bigger. And look, if we want to scrap over the sections of it then, when we're successful, by all means, but what we need everyone to do is to come together and put the shoulder to the wheel to get Ulster Rugby really pushing forward, because I feel, and from being around the coaches' room and the facilities, that there's a good feeling around here, but we need everyone to buy into that.
And in 5 years' time, we're in 2025, let's fast forward to 2030 if you don't mind. Where do you want Ulster to be then? And it'll sound a bit sort of cliche, but I genuinely want it to be somewhere where we have a clear identity, that when people come in here, they go, oh yeah, this is Ulster Rugby, you can feel it. And that people can be very, very proud to be associated with it, and whether that's as a player or whether that's right down to everyone involved with it, anyone wearing a jersey, anyone from this province. And that's my big ambition. And, whatever else comes with that, that if you can achieve that, there'll be other things come with it. But for me, it's that sense of pride. It's what I had in 1989 when I came up to Ravenhill to watch Ireland play the All Blacks, Ulster play the All Blacks. And it's what I want my children to have, my friends' children. I want them to feel a sense of pride with this team, and that people coming to this stadium, they understand what we're about, they understand where we're going, and they want to buy into what Ulster Rugby is all about. Rory, I wish you well.